milk, and honey. According to ancient writers, the Achaemenid Persians had a method called scaphism, and it's about as grim as torture gets. They'd take a condemned man, lay him between two shallow boats with just his head, hands, and feet sticking out, the rest sealed inside. Then they force-fed him milk and honey until he had severe diarrhea, and smeared more honey across his exposed skin. The boats floated out onto a swamp, and insects did the rest, feeding on the flesh and laying eggs in it while the man stayed alive and conscious. Reports say death came over many days, from sepsis, dehydration, and infestation. No named victim survives, and many historians think the whole thing was Greek and Roman sensationalism about Persian cruelty, with zero archaeological proof. The heated bucket. This one's an interrogation tool, documented from early modern Europe right through to 20th century political torture. The setup is simple, and that's what makes it ugly. They strap the prisoner down face up, drop a hungry rat onto his bare stomach, then cover the rat with an upside-down metal bucket. Then they heat the bucket over a flame. The rat panics, and since there's nowhere up and nowhere out, it claws and chews straight down into the abdomen, burrowing into the body to escape the heat. In fatal cases, the cause of death was massive abdominal trauma, hemorrhage, and infection. It was usually meant to pull out a confession, so the only escape was to talk before the rat got through you. Today, it's banned outright under the UN Convention Against Torture. The greased steak. When the Habsburgs crushed the Horea, Kloshka and Cretian peasant uprising in Transylvania in 1784 and 1785, some captured rebels were executed by impalement. The method was engineered to be slow. A large, sharpened stake, often rounded and greased, was driven up through the perineum so it wouldn't kill outright, and then the victim's own body weight did the work, sliding him down the stake hour by hour as it tore through organs and tissue. They were set upright in public, sometimes lining the roads, and contemporary accounts say victims survived for hours, and in some cases 2 or 3 days before dying of internal trauma, sepsis, and shock. Impalement as state punishment faded out of Europe in the 19th century as the legal codes were reformed. A bull that bellows. The tyrant Phalaris ruled Akragas in Sicily around the 6th century BCE, and the story goes that a craftsman named Perillos built him a hollow bronze bull. It had a door in the side and acoustic tubes running up into the head. You locked a man inside, lit a fire underneath, and as the metal heated, he roasted alive, his screams reshaped by those tubes into the bellowing of a bull. Ancient writers claim Phalaris tested it on Perillos himself, ordering the inventor sealed inside his own machine. Cause of death would have been hyperthermia, burns, and smoke inhalation. The catch is, there's no archaeological evidence the bull ever existed, carried to the fire. Anne Askew was a Protestant preacher and noblewoman in Henry VIII's England, arrested for heresy in 1546. Her interrogators wanted names, the high-ranking reformers she supposedly knew at court, and she refused to give them any. So in the Tower of London, they put her on the rack, a frame with rollers at each end, her wrists and ankles tied to ropes. As they cranked the levers, her limbs were pulled in opposite directions until her shoulders and hips dislocated. According to Fox's accounts, she was stretched so far she could no longer walk and had to be carried to her execution. The rack didn't kill her. She was burned at the stake for heresy, her body already broken before the flames. The bottom of your own ship. Keel hauling was a codified naval punishment, especially in the 17th and 18th century Dutch Navy, used on sailors convicted of serious offenses like mutiny. The procedure was brutal in its simplicity. They stripped the man, looped ropes under the ship from one side to the other, and on the signal hauled him down and under the keel, dragging his body along the barnacle-encrusted hull and up the far side. Sometimes he made multiple passes. The barnacles tore the flesh off his chest and back. He struck the hull timbers, and in rough or icy seas he drowned. In fatal cases, the cause was drowning, head trauma, blood loss, and shock, trained to crush. In some South Asian kingdoms, documented into the 18th and 19th centuries across India and Sri Lanka, the executioner was an elephant. These animals were trained to kill in specific ways, and the rulers chose the method to fit the message. In one account from India, the prisoner's head was laid on a wooden block, and the elephant slowly walked forward to crush the skull underfoot. In Sri Lankan accounts, the elephants gored condemned men with their tusks or tossed them before trampling. Some rulers ordered the animal to break limbs first and draw it out. The cause of death was crushing trauma, shattered skull, chest, and pelvis. As colonial penal codes spread, death by elephant was outlawed as barbaric. The cage on the sand. William Jobling was a coal miner, around 30 years old, convicted of murdering a magistrate named Nicholas Farrells during a wage dispute. He was hanged at Durham on the 3rd of August, 1832. But his sentence didn't end with death. His body was dipped in tar and locked inside an iron cage shaped to fit a human form. The gibbet then mounted high on a post out on the Jarrow sands, visible for miles. The hanging was the killing. The gibbet was the message. His corpse left out to rot in public so every worker who passed would remember. Local accounts suggest villagers took the body down in the night. Jobling was among the very last people gibbeted in Britain, the practice formally abolished by the Hanging in Chains Act of 1834. A place to be forgotten. The word itself tells you what the punishment was. An oubliette, from the French for forgetting, was a narrow vertical shaft built into a castle, reachable only through a trapdoor in the ceiling above it. There was no door at ground level, just the hatch. Prisoners were lowered or simply dropped in, with little or no food and water, into a space too cramped to stand or lie down properly. Some shafts held standing water, filth, and rats, so infection and vermin bites stacked on top of the slow death by starvation, thirst, and exposure in the dark. The whole design was built around erasure. Some claimed oubliettes have since been debunked as misidentified storage or waste pits, but the principle was simple: leave a person where no one comes back, sewn in with the animals. Roman law had a special penalty reserved for parricides, people who'd killed a parent, and it was called the poena culae. It's recorded in Roman legal texts from the 1st through the 4th century CE. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack, and they weren't put in alone. Sources mention live animals thrown in with them: a dog, a rooster, a viper, a monkey, all sealed inside the same cramped sack. Then the whole thing was thrown into a river or the sea. The man drowned in the dark, the air running out, trapped against animals tearing and biting in their panic. The idea was symbolic, that killing a parent cut you off from humanity. It vanished with Roman criminal law. Your own weight. The Judas chair, also called the Judas cradle, is attributed to inquisitorial prisons in continental Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. It was a tall seat shaped like a pyramid or cone, with a sharp point at the top. The victim was hoisted up by ropes and then lowered so the point rested against the anus. And from there, the interrogators controlled everything. They could raise or drop him to change the pressure, or rock the body to tear the tissue. The device used the prisoner's own body weight as the instrument. In fatal cases, the cause was perforation, hemorrhage, and sepsis in an age before antibiotics. Historians warn that many surviving Judas chairs in museums may actually be Victorian fabrications. The tub. This one shows up in later torture compilations, attributed vaguely to the Middle Ages in Western Europe, and historians question whether it was ever really used. As reported, the victim was strapped into a wooden tub with only his head left sticking out. His face was smeared with milk and honey to draw in flies and insects. And then, here's the part that made it the bath. He was fed normally, but never allowed to leave, so his own waste built up in the tub around him. Over days, maggots and vermin colonized the filth and ate into his skin, and sores and infections spread until he died of sepsis and organ failure. There's no named victim and no real date, and it may just be a garbled version of scaphism. By the number of blows, Franz Subolt was a convicted murderer in Bavaria, executed in 1589, and his is one of the better attested cases of breaking on the wheel. The condemned was tied spread-eagled to a scaffold or cross, and the executioner used a heavy wheel or an iron bar to smash the limbs at set points: the arms, the legs, the shoulders, the hips. The bones shattered, the limbs bent into impossible angles, and then the broken body was often woven through the spokes of a wheel and hoisted up on a mast to die. The cause was multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and shock. What made it a legal ritual was the counting. Sentences specified exactly how many blows came before the killing one. France's last wheel execution was in 1840. Body parts on the bridge. Sir William Wallace led the Scottish resistance against English rule, and after his capture he was tried for treason and sentenced to the full traitor's death. On the 23rd of August, 1305, he was dragged on a wooden hurdle through the streets of London to Smithfield. There he was hanged, but cut down before he died, so he was still conscious for what came next. He was emasculated and disemboweled, his entrails burned in front of him, and only then was he beheaded and his body cut into 4 quarters. The cause of death was blood loss and shock from the disembowelment and beheading. His head went up on London Bridge, and his limbs were sent to different towns as warnings. The full ritual was reserved for high treason, and finally abolished in Britain by the Forfeiture Act of 1870. Tongue clamped shut. Giordano Bruno was an Italian philosopher and former Dominican friar, tried by the Roman Inquisition for heresy, including his belief in an infinite universe. He spent around 8 years in their prisons before they condemned him as an obstinate and impenitent heretic. On the 17th of February, 1600, they led him out into the Campo de' Fiori, a public marketplace in Rome, reportedly with his tongue clamped so he couldn't speak to the crowd. They stripped him naked, chained him to a stake surrounded by wood, and lit it. There was no merciful strangling first. He died by fire, breathing superheated air and suffering full-thickness burns. Thousands were burned across Europe in those centuries, and Bruno remains one of the most documented of them all. Thanks so much for rocking with the channel for real. Hit that subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss a single one. And got a topic you want me to dig into next? Drop it in the comments.